The fluorescent lights of the main distribution center always flickered at exactly 5 in the morning. For 15 years, that flicker had been my morning alarm, a silent cue that the day had officially begun at Vanguard Logistics. I am Richard Vance, and at 55 years old, I had spent the better part of my adult life building this company from a struggling regional courier into a national supply chain powerhouse. The concrete floors of the warehouse were my second home, the symphony of diesel engines, and forklift reverse sirens my daily soundtrack. Vanguard Logistics was not just a job to me. It was a testament to 18-hour workdays, missed family dinners, and a relentless pursuit of operational perfection. I served as the Chief Operating Officer, though the title hardly encompassed the scope of my responsibilities. I was the architect of our routing network, the negotiator for our vendor contracts, and the crisis manager whenever a winter storm threatened to paralyze our eastern seaboard operations. My relationship with the Chief Executive Officer, Harrison Caldwell, had once been a partnership forged in the trenches of the logistics industry. Harrison was a visionary, a man who could charm investors and paint grand pictures of the future, but visionaries often stumble when it comes to the granular realities of execution. 2 years ago, that exact dynamic nearly drove Vanguard Logistics into complete bankruptcy. Harrison had been seduced by a flashy, unproven warehouse automation technology pitched by a smooth-talking startup in Silicon Valley. Against my strenuous objections, he authorized a massive capital expenditure to integrate their proprietary robotics into our 3 largest distribution hubs. He envisioned a future where human error was eliminated and efficiency skyrocketed. Instead, we got a catastrophic systems failure. The robots could not properly scan barcodes on non-standard packaging, routing algorithms clashed with our legacy warehouse management software, and inventory was misdirected by the hundreds of pallets. Within 3 weeks, our delivery times doubled. Within 6 weeks, clients began threatening to pull their contracts. Vanguard Logistics was bleeding money at an unprecedented rate, and the board of directors was circling like vultures, demanding accountability. Harrison was terrified, his grand vision collapsing into a logistical nightmare that threatened to ruin his legacy and the company itself. It fell to me to salvage the wreckage. I did not just work overtime. I practically moved into the primary distribution center. For 8 agonizing months, I led a triage team that manually overrode the faulty automation systems. We worked in 24-hour shifts, recalibrating the warehouse floors, redesigning the sorting protocols, and personally calling furious clients to beg for grace periods. More importantly, I spent those months coding a proprietary routing algorithm from scratch. I had a background in software engineering long before I moved into operations, and I knew that to save the company, we needed a dynamic, predictive routing system that could bypass the bottlenecked automated hubs and redistribute freight seamlessly across our secondary network. I poured my soul into that software. It was elegant, highly efficient, and entirely my own creation. I patented the algorithm under my own name, a protective measure I took after seeing how recklessly Harrison handled the company's technological assets. I then licensed it to Vanguard Logistics for a nominal fee, ensuring the company could survive without legally owning my intellectual property. The algorithm worked flawlessly. It streamlined our delivery routes, minimized fuel consumption, and restored our on-time delivery metrics to industry-leading standards. The bleeding stopped and the company stabilized. But stabilization was not enough. We needed a massive win to reassure the board and the market. That win came in the form of Atlas Manufacturing, a titan in the industrial machinery sector. Securing their business was the white whale of the logistics industry. I spent 6 months courting their executive team, flying across the country, dining with their supply chain directors, and running countless simulations to prove our new routing system could handle their complex high-value freight. I leveraged every ounce of my operational expertise and personal credibility. Finally, after grueling negotiations, I secured a $22 million contract with Atlas Manufacturing. It was the largest single account in the history of Vanguard Logistics. The Atlas contract did more than just save the company. It catapulted us into a new echelon of profitability. The board of directors was ecstatic. Harrison Caldwell took the credit in the press releases, painting himself as the steady hand that guided the ship through the storm. I did not mind. I was a man of operations, not public relations. My satisfaction came from seeing the trucks roll out on time, knowing that the company I had bled for was secure. I thought my position was unassailable. I thought the 15 years of loyalty, the countless sacrifices, and the literal salvation of the company had cemented my legacy at Vanguard Logistics. I believed that merit, results, and hard work were the ultimate currency in the corporate world. I was profoundly, disastrously wrong. The shift in the atmosphere began subtly, like the drop in barometric pressure before a severe storm. It started with whispered conversations behind closed doors and unusual meetings added to Harrison's calendar without my knowledge. Then, 5 months ago, Harrison called me into his sprawling corner office. The room smelled of expensive leather and polished mahogany. Harrison sat behind his desk, steepling his fingers, an uncharacteristic nervous energy about him. He cleared his throat and gestured to a young man sitting on the leather sofa to his right. "Richard, I want to formally introduce you to Julian Mercer," Harrison said, his voice carrying a forced joviality. "Julian is joining us to observe the operational side of things. Fresh perspective, you know." I looked at Julian. He was 31 years old, dressed in a custom-tailored suit that cost more than most of my warehouse supervisors made in a month. He had perfectly styled hair and a smile that reeked of unearned confidence. He extended a manicured hand. "A pleasure, Richard. I have heard a lot of things about your traditional methods," Julian said, the subtle condescension dripping from every syllable. I shook his hand, my calloused palm contrasting sharply with his soft grip. "Traditional methods saved this company 2 years ago, Julian. Welcome aboard." "What exactly is your background in logistics?" Harrison interjected quickly. Julian recently completed his Master of Business Administration from a very prestigious program. He brings a modern strategic viewpoint that we need as we scale. "Oh, and he also happens to be my new son-in-law." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Son-in-law. It suddenly all made sense. The sudden hire, the vague job description, the forced enthusiasm. Harrison was bringing family into the executive suite, bypassing every established protocol for hiring at the director level. "I see," I replied, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "And what specific role will Julian be taking on?" "Special Projects Director," Harrison beamed. "He will be reporting directly to me, but I want him shadowing you, Richard. Teach him the ropes. Show him how the engine room works." I knew exactly what that meant. I was expected to babysit a privileged, inexperienced academic and pretend his theoretical knowledge was a substitute for actual operational experience. But I was a professional. I nodded, welcomed him again, and went back to work. Over the next 5 months, Julian Mercer proved to be a disaster of epic proportions. His incompetence was matched only by his arrogance. He would wander onto the warehouse floor in his Italian leather shoes, dictating changes to sorting procedures based on case studies he read in a textbook, completely ignoring the practical realities of freight movement. His first major initiative was an attempt to renegotiate our regional trucking contracts to cut costs. Without consulting me, he sent aggressive, borderline insulting emails to 3 of our most reliable regional carriers, demanding immediate rate reductions. 2 of them threatened to walk away immediately. I had to spend an entire weekend doing damage control, flying to their headquarters, and calling in personal favors to keep the trucks moving. When I confronted Julian about it, he merely scoffed. "You have to play hardball, Richard. These mom-and-pop carriers need us more than we need them. You are too emotionally attached to these vendors." Those mom-and-pop carriers kept our Eastern Seaboard network alive during the automation crisis while you were still in graduate school. I snapped back. In logistics, relationships are the only thing that matter when the system breaks down. Do not ever contact my vendors without my authorization again. Julian smirked, a cold, entitled expression that made my blood boil. "We will see about that, Richard. The future of this company is data-driven, not based on nostalgic handshakes." Despite his constant blunders, Harrison continued to praise Julian. Every mistake Julian made was swept under the rug. Every fire I put out was casually dismissed as routine maintenance. It became a grueling, maddening routine. Julian would implement a foolish, untested policy, operations would immediately suffer, and I would quietly roll back the changes and fix the damage before it impacted our quarterly metrics. I was doing two jobs, running the company and managing the CEO's son-in-law. The stress began to take a severe physical toll. My blood pressure spiked, I barely slept, and the flickering lights of the warehouse at 5 in the morning felt less like a welcome and more like an interrogation. I told myself to endure it, to hold out for the sake of the employees who relied on me, for the sake of the Atlas manufacturing contract that I had fought so hard to secure. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday morning during the quarterly executive review. The boardroom, perched on the top floor of our corporate headquarters, offered a panoramic view of the city skyline. 12 men and women, the senior leadership of Vanguard Logistics, sat around the massive oak table. I sat near the head, my tablet loaded with operational data, ready to present our quarterly metrics. We had exceeded expectations again, largely due to the flawless integration of the Atlas manufacturing account. Harrison stood at the head of the table, looking unusually composed, almost smug. He tapped his pen against a glass of water to call the meeting to order. Ladies and gentlemen, before we get into the quarterly numbers, I have a significant organizational announcement to make. Harrison began, his voice projecting across the silent room. As you know, Vanguard Logistics is entering a new era of growth. We are expanding rapidly, and our leadership structure needs to evolve to meet the challenges of tomorrow. A sense of unease washed over me. I glanced across the table at Julian Mercer, who was sitting up remarkably straight, a faint, self-satisfied smile playing on his lips. Richard Vance has been the backbone of our operations for 15 years, Harrison continued, gesturing toward me. His dedication is unquestionable. However, as we look to modernize and bring a more data-centric, strategic vision to our core operations, we need fresh leadership. Therefore, effective immediately, Julian Mercer will be assuming the role of Chief Operating Officer. The boardroom went dead silent, the kind of silence that rings in your ears. 12 senior executives stopped breathing simultaneously. I stared at Harrison, my mind struggling to process the words. Chief Operating Officer, my title, my job, my life's work. Julian brings a wealth of modern strategic knowledge and a fresh perspective that will propel Vanguard Logistics into the future. Harrison plowed on, seemingly oblivious to the shock radiating through the room. Richard, given your extensive historical knowledge of the company, we are transitioning you to the role of Senior Operational Advisor. You will report directly to Julian and assist him during this transition period. 5 months. That is exactly how long his son-in-law had been with Vanguard Logistics before being handed the keys to the kingdom I had spent 15 years building. An inexperienced, arrogant 31-year-old was being placed in charge of a complex national logistics network, and I was expected to become his subordinate, his safety net, his advisor. I looked around the table. The other executives averted their eyes, staring down at their legal pads or tablets. No one spoke, no one objected. They were cowards, every single one of them, afraid to challenge the CEO on a blatant display of nepotism. Julian leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. I look forward to working closely with you, Richard. There are a lot of inefficiencies in our current models that I am eager to correct. Your historical context will be somewhat useful as we rebuild the operational framework. The sheer audacity of the statement was breathtaking. He was implying that the system I had built, the system that was currently generating record profits, was broken and needed his theoretical genius to fix it. I did not scream. I did not throw a tantrum. I did not pound my fists on the table or demand an explanation. 15 years in high-stakes logistics had taught me how to compartmentalize panic and rage. I took a slow, deep breath, feeling the cold, hard reality settle into my bones. Loyalty was indeed a two-way street, and Harrison Caldwell had just dynamited his side of the bridge. I stood up slowly, calmly, gathering my tablet and closing my notebook. Every eye in the room darted toward me, anticipating an explosion. "Richard?" Harrison asked, a note of nervous uncertainty creeping into his voice. "Where are you going?" "We still have the quarterly review." I looked directly into Harrison's eyes. I saw the weakness there, the desperate hope that I would quietly accept this humiliation and continue to carry his company on my back. "I am resigning, Harrison," I said. my voice steady, carrying clearly across the silent boardroom. Effective immediately. Harrison's face flushed. Now, Richard, let us not be hasty. This is an evolution, a strategic realignment. Your compensation will remain the same. You are still a vital part of this family. Family, I repeated, tasting the bitter irony of the word. You clearly have your own definition of family, Harrison. And it seems your strategic realignment does not require my services. You want Julian to run operations? He is all yours. You cannot just walk out. Julian interjected, his smug facade cracking slightly. We have the Atlas manufacturing rollout entering Phase 3 next week. You are supposed to guide me through the transition. I turned my gaze to the young man. You are the chief operating officer now, Julian. Figure it out. I turned on my heel and walked out of the boardroom, leaving a stunned silence in my wake. The walk from the executive suite to my office felt remarkably light. For the first time in 15 years, the crushing weight of Vanguard logistics was no longer resting on my shoulders. I entered my office, closed the door, and pulled a cardboard box from the supply closet. I packed methodically, taking only what was mine. A framed photograph of my late wife, a few industry awards, my personal ergonomic keyboard, and a customized coffee mug given to me by the warehouse crew. I did not touch a single company file or document. It was unnecessary for me to do so. As I packed, my mind was already shifting gears, calculating the next moves with the precision of a routing algorithm. Harrison Caldwell had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed that because I was a loyal soldier, I was also a foolish one. He assumed that the infrastructure of the company belonged entirely to him. He had forgotten one crucial detail. I owned the patent to the routing software. When I created the algorithm during the automation crisis, I had specifically structured the licensing agreement to be contingent on my active employment as an executive officer of Vanguard Logistics. It was a standard protective clause that Harrison's legal team had barely glanced at during the chaos of the crisis. If my employment was terminated, or if my title was reduced, the license was automatically subject to immediate revocation at my discretion. I picked up my personal cell phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice before being answered. Richard, my friend, to what do I owe the pleasure this early in the morning? The voice belonged to Marcus Thorne, the vice president of supply chain at Atlas Manufacturing. Marcus, I said warmly, I am calling to give you a personal heads up. As of 10 minutes ago, I have officially resigned from Vanguard Logistics. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. Resigned? Are you kidding me, Richard? We just signed a $22 million contract with your company specifically because you guaranteed the operational stability. Who is taking over? Harrison has appointed his son-in-law, Julian Mercer, as the new chief operating officer, I explained calmly. He has no operational experience. A string of colorful profanities echoed through the phone. Marcus was a seasoned industry veteran who despised corporate nepotism as much as I did. That is insane. Without you running the network, I have zero confidence they can handle our volume. The penalty clauses in our contract are steep, Richard, but I am not risking our supply chain on a rookie. I understand completely, Marcus, I replied. I also wanted to inform you that the proprietary routing algorithm we use to manage your freight is personally patented by me. I will be revoking Vanguard's license to use it by the end of the business day. Dead silence on the line, followed by a low whistle. You are taking the engine out of the car as you leave, Marcus said, a note of profound respect in his voice. Richard, if you start your own consultancy or move to a competitor, you let me know immediately. I will pull the Vanguard contract tomorrow and follow you anywhere. I appreciate that, Marcus. I will be in touch very soon. I ended the call and placed the phone in my pocket. I then opened my personal laptop, connected to my secure external server, and drafted a formal legal notice of patent license revocation. I emailed it directly to Vanguard's general counsel, copying Harrison Caldwell and Julian Mercer. I picked up my cardboard box and walked out of the office. The administrative assistant stared at me in shock as I made my way to the elevator. I stepped inside, pressed the button for the lobby, and watched the doors slide shut, sealing off 15 years of my life. I walked to my car in the executive parking lot, placed my box in the passenger seat, and drove out through the security gates for the last time. The morning air felt surprisingly crisp, unburdened by the usual oppressive weight of corporate responsibility. I drove to a quiet cafe near my house, ordered a black coffee, and sat at a corner table. I placed my personal cell phone on the table face up and waited. 63 minutes after I walked out of the building with my belongings, the inevitable chaos began. It started with a single phone call from an unknown number, which I ignored. Then came a frantic text message from one of the warehouse floor managers, asking why the central routing dashboard had suddenly gone dark. I replied, simply, "I am no longer with the company. Please direct all operational inquiries to Julian Mercer." Then the floodgates opened. My phone exploded with 27 missed calls in the span of 30 minutes. Most were from Harrison Caldwell, several were from Julian Mercer, and a few were from the panicked general counsel who had finally read my email. I ignored all of them, savoring my coffee. I could vividly imagine the scene at Vanguard Logistics headquarters. The revocation of the patent license was not a slow decay, it was an immediate, hard stop. Without my routing algorithm, the legacy warehouse management software would default back to its rudimentary, linear scheduling. The system that had been effortlessly managing tens of thousands of complex freight movements a day would suddenly regress to the logistical equivalent of the Stone Age. Trucks would arrive at distribution centers with no automated bay assignments. Outbound freight would be loaded onto incorrect regional carriers. The carefully calibrated cross-docking procedures would disintegrate into massive logistical traffic jams. And right in the middle of it all would be Julian Mercer, completely unequipped to handle a crisis of this magnitude, staring at error screens and demanding solutions from a staff that no longer had the tools to provide them. Around noon, my phone buzzed with an incoming email notification. It was a formal communication from Atlas Manufacturing, addressed to Harrison Caldwell, with myself blind copied. Marcus Thorne was not a man who bluffed. The email was a brutal, legally airtight notice of immediate contract termination, citing the sudden departure of key operational personnel and the immediate failure of the agreed-upon routing technologies. Atlas Manufacturing was officially pulling its $22 million account. Furthermore, they were invoking the penalty clauses for service interruption, demanding a massive sum in immediate compensation. I smiled, taking another sip of my coffee. Harrison had traded the stability of his entire corporation for the ego of his son-in-law. The afternoon brought a shift in the tone of the communications from Vanguard. The frantic phone calls stopped, replaced by aggressive, threatening text messages from Harrison. He accused me of sabotage, of corporate espionage, of violating my fiduciary duties. He threatened to sue me into oblivion, promising to tie me up in litigation for the rest of my life. I remained silent. I knew my legal position was absolute steel. The patent was registered in my name. The licensing agreement was explicitly tied to my role as Chief Operating Officer, and my resignation was a direct response to a demotion that violated the implied terms of my employment contract. Let him bluster. It was the desperate flailing of a drowning man. By the end of the week, the situation at Vanguard Logistics had escalated from a crisis to a full-blown catastrophe. Without the Atlas Manufacturing contract, the company's projected quarterly revenue plummeted. The regional carriers, already alienated by Julian's arrogant renegotiation attempts, began refusing loads, citing unpaid invoices and chaotic warehouse conditions. The automation systems, no longer bypassed by my algorithm, began failing again, creating miles-long backups at the primary distribution hubs. The industry news outlets picked up the story with ruthless efficiency. Headlines blared about the sudden collapse of Vanguard Logistics, the mass exodus of key clients, and the disastrous promotion of an unqualified family member to a critical executive role. The stock price, which had been steadily climbing since the Atlas deal, went into a devastating freefall, losing 40% of its value in 3 days. Then came the legal reckoning, but it was not aimed at me. The board of directors, the same cowards who had sat in silence while Harrison handed my job to his son-in-law, suddenly found their courage when their stock options evaporated. They convened an emergency session, excluding Harrison, and brought in a team of aggressive corporate litigators. They filed a massive lawsuit against Harrison Caldwell, citing a severe breach of fiduciary duty. The lawsuit alleged that Harrison had recklessly endangered the company by promoting a grossly unqualified individual, his own son-in-law, over a proven executive, thereby triggering the loss of proprietary technology and the company's largest client. The board argued that Harrison's nepotism was not just bad judgment, but a deliberate violation of his legal obligation to act in the best interests of the shareholders. The details of the lawsuit leaked to the press, and it was a bloodbath. The documents painted a picture of a CEO blinded by familial loyalty, making unilateral decisions that destroyed hundreds of millions of dollars in corporate value. Julian Mercer was named as a co-defendant, accused of misrepresenting his qualifications and grossly mismanaging the operations during his brief, catastrophic tenure as Chief Operating Officer. I watched it all unfold from the comfort of my home office, drafting business plans for my new logistics consultancy. I felt no pity for Harrison or Julian. They had assumed that my loyalty was a permanent, exploitable resource, that I would always be there to clean up their messes while they took the credit and the money. They learned the hard way that competence is the only true currency, and when you strip away the people who actually know how the engine works, the machine will tear itself apart. 2 months later, the final nail was driven into the coffin of Vanguard Logistics. The board of directors, desperate to salvage whatever value remained, voted unanimously to oust Harrison Caldwell as chief executive officer. It was a humiliating, highly publicized termination. Security guards escorted him from the corporate headquarters, the very building where he had arrogantly dismissed my 15 years of service, carrying a single cardboard box, much like the one I had carried out myself. But Harrison's nightmare was only beginning. The lawsuit for breach of fiduciary duty proceeded with ruthless momentum. During the discovery phase, corporate investigators uncovered a trail of internal emails that explicitly detailed Harrison's intent to groom Julian Mercer for the top position, regardless of his catastrophic lack of experience. Worse, they found memos from the legal department warning Harrison about the vulnerability of the patent license. Warnings he had arrogantly ignored, claiming I would never have the spine to actually revoke it. The evidence was overwhelming. Rather than face a devastating public trial that would completely destroy his reputation and potentially result in criminal negligence charges, Harrison chose to settle. The settlement stripped him of his executive severance package, clawed back 3 years of bonuses, and forced him to liquidate a massive portion of his personal stock portfolio to compensate the aggrieved shareholders. He was financially ruined and permanently blacklisted from any board or executive position in the logistics industry. The visionary who had once charmed Wall Street was now a cautionary tale whispered in business schools. As for Julian Mercer, his brief, disastrous stint as chief operating officer became a toxic stain on his resume. The industry news outlets thoroughly documented his role in the collapse, highlighting his arrogant disregard for vendor relationships and his fundamental ignorance of basic supply chain mechanics. No reputable firm would touch him. Last I heard, he was working as a mid-level shift supervisor at a small, regional delivery company, a job he likely secured only because the owner had not read the industry trade publications. The Italian leather shoes had undoubtedly been replaced by steel-toed work boots. Vanguard Logistics, severely crippled by the loss of the Atlas manufacturing contract and the ensuing operational chaos, eventually filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company was broken up and sold for parts. Competitors circled the carcass, buying up distribution hubs, truck fleets, and regional routes for pennies on the dollar. It was a tragic end for a company I had once loved. A stark reminder that even the most robust organizations can be shattered by a few weeks of arrogant mismanagement. However, the collapse of Vanguard created a massive vacuum in the market, one that I was perfectly positioned to fill. A week after Harrison was ousted, I officially launched my own firm, Vance Freight Solutions. I did not need a sprawling corporate headquarters or a bloated executive board. I had my proprietary routing algorithm, my industry knowledge, and, most importantly, my relationships. My first client, unsurprisingly, was Atlas Manufacturing. Marcus Thorne did not hesitate. He signed a comprehensive 5-year logistics management contract with my new firm, a deal even more lucrative than the one he had signed with Vanguard. With that massive account as my foundation, I began approaching the regional carriers, the mom-and-pop trucking companies that Julian had so casually insulted. They remembered me. They remembered the man who flew out to meet them, who understood their struggles, and who treated them as vital partners rather than expendable assets. They eagerly signed on with Vance Freight Solutions, providing me with an immediate, reliable transportation network. Within 6 months, my new company was operating at a profit margin that Vanguard had never achieved, even at its peak. I hired several of the best warehouse managers and shift supervisors who had lost their jobs during the Vanguard collapse, paying them the salaries they actually deserved. We operated lean, fast, and with a ruthless focus on efficiency and mutual respect. The most satisfying moment came a year later, during the final bankruptcy auction of Vanguard's remaining assets. Through a holding company, I purchased the primary distribution center, the very warehouse where the fluorescent lights flickered at 5 in the morning, the place where I had spent 18-hour days saving Harrison Caldwell's business. I walked onto the concrete floor of the warehouse, listening to the familiar symphony of diesel engines and forklift sirens. It was my second home, but now it truly belonged to me. The system I had built was running flawlessly, guided by my algorithm and managed by people who valued competence over pedigree. Looking back, I realized that Harrison Caldwell had not just betrayed me. He had done me a massive favor. He had forced me to recognize my own worth. He had shown me that loyalty is indeed a two-way street, and that sacrificing your life for a company that values nepotism over merit is a fool's errand. I had protected my intellectual property and my professional relationships, and when the time came, those assets proved to be the ultimate leverage. I did not just survive the corporate betrayal. I weaponized it, built my own empire from the ashes, and left the men who thought they could replace me to drown in the wreckage of their own arrogance.